Hi there, Social Studies 20. We're moving into our third unit, related issue, if you want to call them that now. So we're done with related issue number 2, which was our look at ultranationalism and all of the horrors that went with it. What we move on to now is related issue 3, which is a study of internationalism and contemporary, current, modern day global affairs. So what we learn here is nations backing off that degree of ultranationalism that got us into so much trouble. So if you think back to our examination of ultranationalism, you would know that it culminated with World War I, the interwar period of expansionism, World War II, all the genocide that went with it. That is ultra nationalism. And when you think back to around 1945, the end of World War II, the world was in a bad state. World War II alone had cost about 80 million people their lives, 50 million of which were just civilians. There had been a few genocides. Economic cost was trillions of dollars. And World War II ended with, of course, the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So there was a new age that had dawned, and that was the nuclear age. America had the atomic bomb. Very soon, the Soviet Union will have its own atomic bomb by 1949. And so the post World War II 1945 climate was one of devastation in terms of humanitarian lives, in terms of economics, and the dangers of the new nuclear age. It had become pretty clear, pretty evident to almost everyone that ultranationalism was not going to work. It was not sustainable. It was going to lead to further conflict, further chaos, and maybe World War III, which could have become a nuclear war. And so, what nations do beginning in 1945, they embrace the concept of internationalism. They're going to cooperate with each other. They're going to work with each other rather than working against each other. So they're going to back off that high degree of nationalism. It's not going to be that important anymore to be French or German or British or whatever. They're going to try to work more in harmony with each other. Now, I'm not saying that nationalism disappears. It doesn't. It's still alive and well. It is alive and well today. But nations backed off putting themselves always first at anyone and everyone else's expense. That is the era of internationalism. It actually coincides with a lot of what you learned back in 10-1, which of course is globalization. So internationalism post 1945 coincided with free trade that you learned last year in grade 10. It coincides with actually it's the beginning of the UN. The UN, the United Nations, is founded in 1945 as an example, as an embracement of this new era of internationalism, of nations working together with each other rather than against each other. So a different time, a different era of human history beginning in 1945. In terms of where we are on our spectrum, well, if you think back, nationalism, French Revolution, citizenship was related issue number 1. We learned that back in February. Ultranationalism was related issue number 2. We just learned that. Internationalism is related issue number 3, and we're about to learn that. The sad thing is, because of the lockdown and whatever, we won't get very far with it. We'll only get about 3 weeks in, which, is better than nothing, but not enough to really do it justice. I want to leave a couple of days at the end at least to talk a bit about supranationalism as another possible solution. So we did this, we're about to do this, and we might get time to do this. That's where we're going on the spectrum. So nations haven't abandoned, but by 1945, they're questioning and challenging ultranationalism. It's just not working. It's not sustainable. And so they're going to, move from this shift to the left, which is ultranationalism, and now they're going to move over this way. They're going to embrace internationalism. And some regions will even embrace supranationalism, which is, extreme internationalism. And this new era of internationalism's got a lot going for it. There has not been a World War III. And a lot of that is because of the embracement of the internationalist era. Keep going. We're not quite done yet. I want to get you thinking a little bit about, different concepts, different ways of thinking about internationalism. Um, to get a bit more specific, there's three kinds of internationalism. The first one is what is known as liberal internationalism. And this is one in which it's a form of internationalism where all nations are the same. All nations are equal. So no one nation is more dominant than the other. So you can see on this diagram, all of these purple circles are nations. They all interact with each other. These interactions could be free trade, they could be economic, they could be political, like the UN, the WHO, the Red Cross, and so on. But they're all working with each other, and it's important to note that they are all equals. No one nation is bigger or more important than the rest. They are all equals. So examples of liberal internationalism would be the old League of Nations, which of course we learned didn't work, but it was liberal internationalism. Modern day UN theoretically is made up of nations that are equal, although in reality it doesn't really work out that way. The big ones still dominate. Trade blocs could be examples of liberal internationalism, although again, one nation always does seem to be more dominant than the others. World Vision could be another example of that. We'll study all kinds of these as we move on through this new unit. Second kind of internationalism is called hegemonic internationalism, and this one you'll recognize right away. So this is when nations interact, but they don't interact as equals. One nation is stronger than the rest, and it exerts its influence on the rest, even at the expense of the other nations. So if I think about Britain in the 1800s when they, conquered and colonized all those colonies worldwide, I mean, after all, as the saying goes, the sun never sets on the British Empire, meaning that the empire was all over the world. The sun was always up someplace in the old British Empire. Um, so if this is Britain in the 1800s, these would be all the British colonies that Britain exerted its influence on. That's hegemonic. So to have hegemony means you have dominance. To have hegemony equals dominance. So internationalism can be hegemonic. It means that one nation is just so powerful, it exerts its influence on other nations. So in the 1800s, it was Great Britain. I would say latter half of the 1900s, that big country would be the USA, was the most dominant, exerting its influence on all other nations. Today, a lot of people are speculating that big country, if there is one, could actually be China, that is establishing hegemonic internationalism, one country dominating all the others, and the interactions that come from that dominance, hegemonic internationalism. Final one we'll talk about here today is revolutionary internationalism. And this is an internal, well, I mean, I guess all revolutions are internal, but an internal change to one country, but it's because of international influence. And so the best examples that I could think of, well, the best one was the French Revolution because we studied it. You're well aware of it. So if this was France in 1789, they overthrew the monarchy and established democracy because of what was going on outside of France. The American Revolution, for one, the Americans overthrew their oppressors, the British, and established a democracy. And that influence inspired the French to do the same in 1789. That's what I mean by revolutionary internationalism. One nation makes changes internally, domestically, because of influences outside of that nation. So the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, what is known as the Arab Spring, which you'll learn about actually in grade 12, would be an example of revolutionary internationalism. That's what we're talking about. And that should do it for our look. We're just beginning this unit. We're just getting started with it. For the remainder of our time this morning as you work on your stuff, I'd like you to work on the Chapter 11 vocabulary. All of this stuff, by the way, is under Content D2L Chapter 11. It's all in there, the vocab, the notes, the blank vocabulary sheets. Let's get started thinking about internationalism by defining some words, some concepts, understanding what they really mean, because we're going to come back to these over the next couple of weeks. So that's what you can work on for the remainder of our time working today. I thought I'd take it a little easy on you. You did a position paper and some big papers last week. Thought I'd back off a little bit, give you some time to get this done. Okay? I look forward to talking with you tomorrow.